The WNBA just did something it almost never does. It admitted it was wrong, went back into an official box score, and corrected it. And if you think that sounds like a minor housekeeping moment, you are not paying attention to what actually just happened here. Because this correction did not come quietly from some back-office review process. It came because tens of thousands of people on social media collectively refused to accept a stat sheet that did not match what they watched with their own eyes. Fans, analysts, content creators, and even former players all came together and said, "No, that is not what happened." And eventually, the league had no choice but to listen. Now, here's the part that makes this story bigger than just one corrected number. This was not the first time something like this happened. It was not even close to the first time this season. We are talking about a pattern of stat-keeping issues that has been building quietly for a while, and this particular moment simply became the flashpoint that forced everybody to pay attention. Assists getting awarded to the wrong players, turnovers landing on people who never touched the ball, rebounds being credited in ways that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. And when the player at the center of this correction is Caitlin Clark, someone who is already one of the most watched athletes in women's sports history, you better believe the entire internet is going to notice. So today, we are breaking all of it down. The stat-keeping mess, the specific plays that drove fans absolutely crazy, the history of this problem going back to last season, and exactly what Caitlin Clark did on that court that made the correction not just necessary, but historically significant. Because what she put up in that game was not just good, it was something that has literally never been done before in the history of this league. Let's get into it. Before we even get to the Caitlin Clark situation specifically, we need to establish something important. The frustration fans have been feeling about WNBA stat keeping this season did not start with her. It has been a slow-burning issue that built up over weeks and weeks of questionable entries showing up on official box scores that simply did not match what was happening on the floor. And look, nobody is asking for perfection here. Sports stat keeping has always had some level of human judgment baked into it. Basketball, more than almost any other sport, requires officials and statisticians to make real-time decisions about possessions that can happen incredibly fast. Sometimes the ball changes hands in a fraction of a second. Sometimes a play develops in an unusual way that does not fit neatly into any traditional statistical category. Those kinds of edge cases have always existed, and reasonable fans understand that. But what has been happening this season goes well beyond edge cases. We are talking about plays where there is genuinely no debate. Possessions where the ball clearly left one player, went directly to a teammate, and that teammate scored immediately after catching it, and somehow the assist either ended up on the wrong player or was not recorded at all. Turnovers that were assigned to players who weren't even involved in the possession. Rebounds credited to teams or individuals in ways that made experienced basketball fans genuinely confused. And the thing about basketball fans today is that they are not passive viewers anymore. People pause games, they rewind, they clip specific possessions, slow them down frame by frame, post them side by side with the official box score, and share them with hundreds of thousands of followers within minutes of the play happening. The days when a questionable stat entry could just quietly disappear into the record books are over. The moment something looks wrong, somebody is already making a video about it. And when that video goes viral, which it absolutely will if the play is obvious enough, the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. That is the environment the WNBA is operating in right now. A growing, engaged, extremely attentive fan base that watches every possession closely and will not stay quiet when the numbers don't add up. And this season, the numbers have not been adding up with an uncomfortable level of regularity. If you want one single example that perfectly captures everything wrong with how stat keeping is gone this season, look no further than the play involving Erica Wheeler, Darica Hamby, and Kelsey Plum. Because this one was not a close call. This was not one of those plays where you could at least understand how a split-second decision in real time might have led to a mistake. This was the kind of thing where you watch it and genuinely wonder if the person recording the stats was watching the same game.
Here is what happened. Erica Wheeler brought the ball up and made a pass to Darica Hamby at the top of the key. Reasonable start. Hamby catches the ball, and from that point forward, nothing that happens next has anything to do with an assist. Hamby dribbles the ball multiple times, she pivots, she scans the floor looking for options, she fakes a handoff to a teammate that doesn't happen, she holds on to the basketball, and then, after doing all of that on her own, she drives to the basket and scores. Kelsey Plum was awarded the assist. Let that sit for a second. Kelsey Plum, for a basket that Dirk Gahedi created entirely by herself from scratch, after holding the ball for several seconds, after pivoting, after creating her own shot opportunity off the dribble, Kelsey Plum got the assist. The reason this particular play became such a flashpoint is because it exposes the core problem with how assists are apparently being evaluated. There is a basic standard in basketball that most fans understand instinctively. If a player receives a pass and then does significant individual work to create their own shot, dribbles, pivots, hesitations, direction changes, the player who made the original pass no longer qualifies for an assist. That is not a complicated concept. That is just basketball. The unofficial threshold that most people use is around 2 dribbles. If you take more than 1 or 2 dribbles before shooting, the previous passer typically does not get credit. And in Hamby's case, we were not talking about 1 or 2 dribbles. We were talking about a prolonged possession where she completely took over the play herself. Yet somehow, an assist ended up on the board for a player who was not even the one who passed her the ball in the first place. That is the kind of thing that makes people stop trusting the official numbers entirely. And when trust in the stat sheet starts eroding, everything else becomes suspect too, including numbers that actually were recorded correctly. The Kelsey Plum situation was bad enough on its own, but the Paige Bueckers-related stat issues this season have been their own separate saga, and they are worth breaking down because they reveal a different kind of problem. Not just wrong stats, but inconsistent standards being applied to the same type of play over and over again. Here is something specific about Paige Bueckers' game that sets up why this keeps happening. When she grabs a defensive rebound, she has a tendency to briefly pause and collect herself before pushing the pace up the floor. Most guards, the moment they secure the defensive board, are already in transition, one fluid motion from catching the ball to initiating the break. Paige occasionally takes that extra beat first, and during that pause, defenders sometimes swipe at the ball. Now, that should be a fairly routine situation for a scorer to handle correctly. A player grabs a rebound, a defender reaches in and knocks it loose. That is a turnover on the player who had the ball, in this case, Paige. Pretty straightforward, except it has not been straightforward at all. One time, that exact type of possession came up, and it was recorded as a Paige Bueckers turnover. Accurate. Another time, nearly the same play happened, and it became a Dallas team turnover, with no individual player assigned at all. Another time, she got the rebound credit, but the turnover that followed was assigned somewhere else entirely. The same type of play generating 3 completely different outcomes in the box score. That is not just a mistake in one game, that's a systemic inconsistency in how these possessions are being evaluated. And then there was the Enrique Ugan sequence, which was genuinely one of the most confusing individual stat decisions of the entire season. Paige fumbled the basketball, the ball bounced in an awkward direction, and it accidentally kicked off the back of Enrique Ugan's foot while Enrique was running down the floor, completely uninvolved in the play. The ball went out of bounds or changed possession in some way, and the turnover ended up assigned to Enrique. Enrique, who was running and got kicked in the foot by a ball she never touched intentionally, got credited with the turnover. But it actually gets stranger. There was at least one other possession where Paige was not even given the rebound at all, seemingly to avoid having to then assign her the turnover that immediately followed. Instead of recording a Paige rebound followed by a Paige turnover, the whole sequence got cleaned up by simply giving the rebound to Indiana as an offensive board. Problem solved. Except not really, because now the box score is reflecting something that didn't happen.
And this is what makes fans so genuinely frustrated. It is not just that individual mistakes happen, it is that the pattern of mistakes sometimes seems to follow a logic of its own, one that does not match what is actually on the court. Here is something that gets lost when people talk about this season's stat issues as if they appeared out of nowhere. This has been going on for longer than most people realize, and last season provided some of the clearest and most consistent examples of the exact same problem playing out over and over again. The player who ended up at the center of it last season was Grace Berger, and specifically, what kept happening was that turnovers that clearly belonged to Paige Bueckers were somehow ending up credited to Grace Berger in the official box score. Now, Grace Berger is a solid professional basketball player. She works hard, competes, and contributes to winning. But there were stretches last season where if you looked only at her turnover numbers, you would have thought she was single-handedly sabotaging Indiana's possessions every night, because the turnovers kept piling up. And if you watched the games carefully, a lot of them looked like Paige Bueckers' mistakes. There was actually a game, and this is the one that people still bring up when this topic comes up, where Grace Berger was credited with 3 turnovers in a single half. 3! And when fans went back and looked at the plays, all 3 of them appeared to be Paige Bueckers' possessions that went wrong. One of them was particularly obvious. Paige dribbled the ball directly off her own foot. The ball rolled away, possession changed, and the turnover appeared under Grace Berger's name in the box score, not Paige Bueckers, Grace Berger, for a ball that Paige Bueckers dribbled off her own foot. So when people talk about the Caitlin Clark stat controversy this season as if it came out of nowhere, the context matters. Fans who had been following Indiana closely were already primed to question what they saw in the official numbers. They had already spent an entire season watching the box score fail to match the game. By the time Clark's assist totals became a controversy, there was already an entire community of people who had been trained to scrutinize every single stat entry. And sure enough, they found exactly what they expected to find. So now we get to the game itself, and to understand why the reaction online was as immediate and intense as it was, you need to understand what fans were watching in real time. Caitlin Clark was making plays that were, by any standard definition, assists. We are talking about possessions where she received or created the ball, made a direct pass to a teammate, and that teammate scored immediately after catching the ball. Clean, obvious, undeniable assists, the kind that do not require any replay review or slow-motion analysis, the kind that every single person watching on their couch at home could recognize instantly. And then the box score did not reflect what they saw. The clips started spreading before the game was even fully over. People were pulling specific possessions, showing the play on one side of the screen and the box score on the other, and the numbers simply did not match. Analysts started doing their own counts. Former players weighed in. The conversation was everywhere simultaneously, moving at the speed that only social media can generate when something strikes a nerve this hard. Now, what made this particular situation carry more weight than the usual stat complaint is that the numbers were not just slightly off. Based on what people were seeing in the clips, Caitlin Clark was sitting at somewhere around 8 credited assists, when by most counts she had clearly made 10. That is not a rounding error. That is not a borderline call going one way or the other. That is 2 complete, unambiguous plays being entirely absent from the official record. And for a player who was already in the conversation for one of the great individual performances in the WNBA on that particular night, 2 missing assists was not a small thing. It was the difference between a good game and a historic one. It was the difference between a notable box score line and something that had literally never been accomplished before in the league. The social media response was not quiet. It was loud, sustained, and filled with enough specific evidence, actual video clips of actual plays, that it could not be dismissed as fans just being upset about a loss or overreacting to a borderline call. The evidence was right there. Everybody could see it. And eventually, the WNBA saw it too.
2 days. That is how long it took from the game ending to the WNBA officially going back and correcting the stat sheet. 2 days of social media pressure, viral clips, analyst breakdowns, and public scrutiny before the league acknowledged what everybody already knew. The original box score was wrong. The correction gave Caitlin Clark the 2 assists she had earned, and with those 2 assists restored, the final stat line read 32 points and 10 assists. Now let that number settle in for a second. 32 points and 10 assists in a single game in the WNBA. Here is why that combination is so historically significant. Nobody has ever done it before. Not once. Not in any game in the entire history of this league. Not Sue Bird, not Diana Taurasi, not Cheryl Swoops, not Cynthia Cooper, not Maya Moore. Not any of the legends who built this sport from the ground up and carried it for decades before Caitlin Clark ever stepped onto a professional floor. Nobody has ever recorded 30 or more points alongside 10 or more assists in a single WNBA game. That had never happened until now. Think about what that means in terms of where Caitlin Clark is already positioned in the history of this league. And she is still in the early stages of her career. She has not even played a full 2 seasons yet, and she is already doing things that nobody in the history of professional women's basketball has ever done. That is not hype, that is not media narrative, that is just the record book and what it says right now. The correction also matters beyond just one player's statistics, because every time a league goes back and fixes an official record, it sets a precedent. It demonstrates that public accountability has teeth. It tells fans that their scrutiny, their clips, their organized pressure actually produce results. And in a league that is trying to grow its audience, trying to build trust with a new generation of viewers, that kind of responsiveness matters more than most people give it credit for. But, and this is important, the fact that it took 2 days and a full-scale social media campaign to correct something that was clearly visible to everyone watching is not a success story. It is a problem that got fixed, which is different. Success would have been catching the error during the game or in the immediate post-game review process, the way any well-functioning stat-keeping operation should. The correction was the right call. The need for public pressure to force it is the part that still needs to be addressed. To really appreciate what happened in that game, you need to zoom out and look at the full body of work Caitlin Clark has been building since she stepped into the league. Because this was not some isolated explosion from a player having a career night. This was the latest entry in a growing collection of performances that have been redefining what is possible in this league, one game at a time. Start with the Washington game during her rookie year, because that one still holds a special place in the conversation about her best performances. Indiana was down by a significant margin heading into the fourth quarter. The game, by any reasonable measure, was over. And then, Caitlin Clark decided it was not. What she did in that fourth quarter was one of the most dominant stretches of offensive basketball you will see from any player at any level. Every single possession ran through her. When Indiana needed a bucket, she found a way. When they needed to generate something in transition, she pushed it herself. When defenders collapsed, she found the open teammate. When they stayed home, she attacked the rim. She finished with 32 points and 10 assists and dragged her team back from a deficit that should have been insurmountable. She had a late turnover when Indiana was down 3 points that people remember, and some people use to criticize that particular game. But here's the honest context for that. Indiana should not have even been close enough for that turnover to matter. The only reason a late 3-point deficit felt heartbreaking instead of routine was because Caitlin Clark had already done something extraordinary in getting them there. You cannot erase the entire fourth quarter comeback just to make the final turnover feel more damning than it was. That was also the famous kids' camp game, which added a completely different layer to the atmosphere that night. The crowd, the energy, the moment,
all of it combined to make that performance feel even larger than the numbers already justified. Then there was the Dallas game, which from a pure playmaking standpoint might be the most technically impressive she has looked in a WNBA uniform. She finished with 24 points and 19 assists. 19! That number is almost impossible to wrap your head around in the context of a basketball game. 19 times she created a scoring opportunity for a teammate that resulted in a made basket. That is not a hot shooting night or a highlight reel moment. That is a complete mastery of how to control and direct an offense from start to finish.
And people often forget about the near triple-double against the New York Liberty, which deserves more recognition than it typically gets. She finished that game with 32 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists, 1 rebound and 1 assist away from a 32-point triple-double. And the general consensus among people who watch that game closely is that she probably gets those final 2 stats if she stays on the floor longer in the closing minutes instead of being pulled slightly earlier than she might have otherwise. What all of these performances share is a specific mental quality that defines truly elite players. Every single one of them included a stretch where Caitlin Clark was not at her best, a quarter where the shots were not falling, a sequence where the defense found a way to slow her down temporarily. And in every single one of those games, she came through on the other side of that rough stretch and delivered when the game was on the line. That is not something that shows up in a box score. You cannot find it in the assist totals or the shooting percentages, but it is what separates good players from players who leave a permanent mark on the sport. The ability to stay mentally present, to keep competing, to trust your preparation and your ability when nothing is working, that is the rarest quality in all of professional sports, and Caitlin Clark has demonstrated it repeatedly. The recent game fits the exact same pattern. Through 3 quarters, the shot was not consistently falling. The efficiency numbers were not where she would have wanted them. A lesser player, or a player still developing their professional confidence, might start pressing, might start forcing shots, might start trying to manufacture the kind of performance that looks good on paper, rather than just continuing to play the right way. She kept attacking, she kept believing, and the 4th quarter happened. That is what superstars do. We have seen A'ja Wilson do the exact same thing, grind through ugly efficiency numbers for 3 quarters, and then still find a way to impact the game when it matters most. There was a Chicago game years back where A'ja struggled badly with her shot for most of the night, and then hit the game winner when everything was on the line. That is the kind of moment that defines legacies. And Caitlin Clark is adding those kinds of moments to her own legacy at a pace that is honestly startling given how early she still is in her career. Here is the uncomfortable reality that this entire situation points toward. The WNBA is in the middle of the most significant period of growth it has ever experienced. Viewership is up, attendance is up, social media engagement is up. New fans are discovering the league through players like Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson and Paige Beckers, and they are bringing a level of scrutiny and attention that this league has never had to manage before at this scale. That is an extraordinary opportunity. When more people are watching, when more people care, when the conversations around your league are happening at the volume they are happening at right now, that is when you build something lasting. That is when casual fans become dedicated fans. That is when a sport crosses from niche into mainstream in a way that actually sticks. But that opportunity comes with a responsibility. Because those same new fans who are tuning in for the first time, they are also the ones who are quickest to form impressions. And if the impression they form is that the official stat records cannot be trusted, that the box score does not match what they just watched, that it takes 2 days and a social media firestorm to correct something that was obviously wrong, that is not the impression you want to leave on a fan who is just starting to invest their time and attention. The stat-keeping issues this season have not been isolated curiosities. They have been a recurring story that has followed the league's biggest moments around like a shadow. Every time something historic happens on the court, there has been some version of a question mark hanging over the official numbers. That is not a coincidence. That is a structural problem that needs to be addressed at an organizational level.
The specific fix needed is not complicated. More oversight, better real-time review processes, clearer official definitions of what qualifies as an assist, a rebound, a turnover in ambiguous situations, faster correction timelines when errors are identified. These are not revolutionary ideas. They are the basic infrastructure of a professional sports league that takes its own record-keeping seriously. The players deserve it. A player who makes a real assist should get credit for that assist immediately, not after 2 days of public pressure. A player who does not commit a turnover should not see one appear next to her name in the box score. The integrity of the statistical record is the foundation of how we evaluate performance, how we compare eras, how we tell the story of what happened on a basketball court on any given night. When that foundation is shaky, everything built on top of it is shaky too. And for a player like Caitlin Clark, someone who is already doing things that have never been done before in the history of professional women's basketball, the accuracy of the record matters enormously. Because decades from now, when people look back at this era of the WNBA and try to understand what she was doing statistically, they are going to be looking at box scores. Those box scores need to be right. The 32 points and 10 assists that she officially has now, those are the correct numbers. Those are what actually happened on that court. And what happened on that court was historic by any definition. Nobody else in the history of this league has ever put up that combination in a single game. That is not a small thing. That is a permanent entry in the record books that will still be there long after the social media cycle has moved on to the next controversy. What Caitlin Clark is doing right now, the floor vision, the playmaking range, the shooting off the dribble from distances that most players would not even attempt, the ability to take over a fourth quarter when her team needs her most, all of it is genuinely rare. The kind of rare that you do not fully appreciate until you have watched it consistently over enough time to understand that it is not a fluke and it is not a hot streak. It is a sustained level of performance that is rewriting what we thought was possible in this league. And if the last 2 seasons are any indication of what is coming next, we are still in the early chapters of this story. The WNBA made the right call by correcting the stat sheet. Caitlin Clark got the 2 assists she earned. The record now says what it should have said immediately. But the bigger conversation about how this league tracks its own history, about the systems in place to ensure accuracy, about whether the infrastructure is keeping pace with the moment the sport finds itself in, that conversation is not over. It has barely started. Tell me in the comments what you think. Has the WNBA's stat keeping been good enough this season, or has it been a genuine problem that the league needs to address seriously? And if you think this has been an issue, what would you want to see changed? Drop it below. I read everything. And if you are not subscribed yet and you care about honest breakdowns of what is actually happening in women's basketball, hit that button and turn on notifications. More is coming.